Hello and welcome back to Bits and Bobs. In today's video we're going to be going over every single design of gold sovereign since 1817 when the first modern gold sovereign was introduced. So let's fly back in time to 1817 and look through all the designs of sovereigns. And here we are, the first ever gold sovereign. Now then, this now iconic design was designed by Benedetto Pastrucci and features a royal garter around the outside of a picture of George slaying the dragon, just like in the famous St. George and the Dragon story. He's holding a broken spear, and the other side of the spear is plunged within the dragon. There is no date on the reverse, and on the obverse we can see the date 1817, which, as I said, is the first year the modern sovereign was introduced. The legend reads, George III, by the grace of God, and King of all the Britons, defender of the faith, and this is a translation from Latin. His portrait sees him looking to the right and wearing a laureate wreath crown. So, let's move on and see how the coin has evolved. The design first changed in 1821, and here we can see the new design. Still featuring the portrait of George slaying the dragon, St. George is now holding his sword, and the royal garter around the outside of the coin has gone. The date is now on the reverse, 1821, and the initials BP for Benedetto Pastrucci can be seen just to the right of the date. On the obverse of this new coin, we see a new monarch, George IV. The legend reads, George IV, by the grace of God, defender of the faith and King of Britain, and he is facing to the left this time, but still wearing a laureate wreath crown. Now, this design was used on the first coinage and sovereigns of George IV, but his design underwent a design change, and here it is, now featuring a much skinnier and smaller portrait head and no longer wearing a laureate wreath crown. This design was introduced in 1825, and from then on the sovereigns on the reverse also had a different design. Here we see a shield, and zooming in we can see the intricacy and detail. There's a Hanoverian shield crowned inside a royal shield with decorative ornamentation on the sides and the St. Edward's crown on the top. And part of the legend that is usually on the obverse is now on the reverse, as we can see King of the Britons and Defender of the Faith written in Latin around the side of this coin. The next design change came with the next monarch, which was William IV. Here we see his portrait done by William Wyon on the left, and he is also wearing no crown or no laureate. On the reverse, the shield design is exactly the same, but just larger on the coin as the legend has been taken away. At the very bottom you can see the date, in this case 1832, and it also says anno, which is another Latin word in reference to the year after Christ. William IV had a fairly short reign and only saw one style of sovereign during his time. But however, in 1838 a new sovereign was introduced under the reign of Queen Victoria, and here we see the design. A very intricate royal shield, crowned with the St. Edward's crown and encircled by a wreath. The wreath is tied with ribbon at the bottom of the shield, and underneath this we can see the leek, rose and shamrock representing each country in the Union. On the obverse we see the young head portrait of Queen Victoria designed by William Wyon. The legend reads Victoria by the grace of God, and the date is now on the obverse once again, as there's no George and the Dragon. Until 1871, when the George and the Dragon design was revived on sovereigns. This is the version obviously without the garter and the date underneath the portrait of George slaying the dragon. This design was used for the rest of Queen Victoria's reign, but there are some obverse changes. Firstly, when the George and the Dragon design came back, the date was no longer on the obverse with the young head, as it now features underneath the George and the Dragon portrait. In 1887, Queen Victoria celebrated her Golden Jubilee on the throne, and to mark the event, a new portrait of her was introduced on the coinage and onto gold sovereigns. Designed by Sir Joseph Edgar Boehm, this lovely portrait was used on gold sovereigns and coins alike from 1887 to 1892. When it was first released back in 1887, the design wasn't very popular with the public, but in the years since it has become a collector's favourite. And in 1893, the veiled head portrait was put onto sovereigns for the rest of Queen Victoria's reign. It was designed by Thomas Brock and features the Queen wearing a crown and a veil, hence the name Veiled Head Portrait. And so that means the next change to sovereigns was also a change to monarchs. Here we see the 1902 gold sovereign, with the familiar design now on the reverse. And on the obverse a new portrait is seen. This is that of Edward VII, designed by George William de Soules, and features the king uncrowned with no laureate, facing to the right. In 1911, the first gold sovereigns were struck under the reign of George V. However, they didn't last long, as 1918 was the last year gold sovereigns were struck for circulation due to World War I, and for a while, sovereigns weren't struck again. In 1937, more sovereigns were struck. A half, full, double and 5 sovereign were struck to mark the king's coronation that year, and we see him here, on the left, Designed by Humphrey Paget, this portrait sees him facing left and uncrowned, a tradition now for kings. However, it would be another 20 years until sovereigns were struck again. In 1957, the gold sovereign was revived. However, it was now an investment coin, as the price of the gold in the coin had risen to £3 rather than the £1 face value, although they are legal tender still. By this time we also see a new portrait on the obverse. This is that of Queen Elizabeth II, her first portrait designed by Mary Gillick and was used on all Elizabeth II coinage. They were minted every year until 1968. Between 1968 and 1974 none were minted, but in 1974 they were revived once again, now featuring a new portrait of the Queen, designed by Arnold Machin and brought in for decimalisation a few years earlier to this coin being struck. The next design change was in 1989. To commemorate the 500th anniversary of the original sovereign struck in 1489, this design was released. We see the Tudor roses and the royal shield and a new portrait of the Queen on the throne. The next change was in 1998, and this was an obverse change. A new portrait of the Queen was released that year for all coins, including sovereigns. This one was designed by Ian Rank Broadley. The next design for sovereigns was a special year sovereign minted in 2002 to commemorate the Queen's Golden Jubilee. Here we see a royal crown shield featuring the laureate wreaths around it, a hark back to older designs. In 2005, for no particular reason, Timothy Node was commissioned to design a special year sovereign, featuring George slaying the dragon in a more modern interpretation. In 2012, for the Queen's Diamond Jubilee, another modern interpretation of George slaying the dragon was put onto the sovereigns as a special year design for collectors. The next change came in 2015, but it isn't a reverse change, it's an obverse change, as we now see the introduction of the portrait of the Queen by Jodie Clark, the fifth portrait of the Queen. In 2017, this design was released to commemorate 200 years of the modern sovereign. The original design from 1817 was restruck once again as a nod back to the old design, meaning that the date was on the obverse for the first time in a very, very long time, and who knows when it will be on the obverse again. In 2022, to commemorate Queen Elizabeth II's Platinum Jubilee, this design was released. Again by Timothy Node, we see the royal arms of the United Kingdom on the reverse. And another coin was struck in 2022, the first time two sovereigns have been struck that year. This one is a very intricate design by Jodie Clark and is a memorial sovereign to Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, but will be featuring the portrait on the obverse of Charles III. Comment down below if you think the 2023 sovereign will bear a special design or just be normal. But thank you for watching so much, we hope you subscribe and we'll see you again on Bits and Bobs for more videos. Bye!